Okay, welcome to Concept 3.9. Now, in our last video, we said that there's something called discretionary monetary policy, which means that we're actively trying to fix something. But there's also something called non-discretionary fiscal policy. We also refer to this as automatic stabilizers. What do I mean by this? I mean, there's a law that's already in place. The government isn't doing things just to fix the recession right now. There are things that we decided long ago that have a positive impact on our economy when we're in a recession or when we have an inflationary gap. Those are automatic stabilizers or non-discretionary fiscal policy. Let's get into it. Here we go. So non-discretionary fiscal policy is passive, meaning that we establish these automatic stabilizers before we fell into a recession. They're in place all of the time and they don't change, but they have a positive impact when we have a recessionary or inflationary gap. So most of the time when we're talking about automatic stabilizers, it's tax and spending laws. These are laws that are in place for a long period of time that help, right? So when we're in a recessionary gap, they expand a little bit. For example, we have a transfer payment law with unemployment benefits. So when we fall into a recession, there's unemployment benefits that are paid out that helps a little bit. Income rises a little bit for people that lose their jobs. In addition, we have tax laws. So when we fall into a recessionary gap, people pay fewer taxes than they did before, which helps a little bit when we are in a recession. And same thing happens in inflationary gaps. When we have an inflationary gap, fewer people get those transfer payments, which means that there's a reduction in consumption, which has a slight contractionary impact on our economy when we need it. And same thing with taxes. When people are making more money in an inflationary gap, taxes rise, which contracts our economy a little bit and helps. So again, these are laws in place way ahead of time, not actively saying, hey, let's change government spending and taxes like discretionary fiscal policy. It's, hey, let's set these laws that will help us at all times, no matter what's happening. And we don't have to pass special policies, special stimulus packages in order to fix a recessionary or inflationary gap. Best examples we have are our progressive tax system, our welfare system, and our minimum wage. Progressive tax system means when you make more money, you get taxed more. When you make less money, you get taxed less. Okay, so that has non-discretionary impact. Fiscal policy, it helps us a little bit because when people lose their jobs in a recession, they pay fewer taxes, which has a slight expansionary impact. People have a little bit more income than they had before. Welfare, like we were saying, people lose their jobs, they get paid money from the government, which has a slight expansionary impact in a recession. But there are way fewer people on welfare when we're in an inflationary gap, which has a contractionary impact, slight contractionary. And then, of course, minimum wage. Even when people lose their jobs and they get a job, the minimum wage helps stabilize that as well. So it looks something like this. Automatic stabilizers, our progressive tax system is our best one, and the one that you'll see referred to often. So if there's an increase in GDP, what's going to happen? Well, there's going to be an increase in taxes. And an increase in taxes, we know, is contractionary fiscal policy. So it's going to pull down consumption a little bit and help stabilize our economy when we need it. If there's a decrease in GDP, recessionary gap, then there's going to be a decrease in taxes, which has a slight expansionary impact on our economy as a whole. Go back there so you can check that out. So decreases taxes, expansionary impact. Neither of these is going to fix the economy. It just helps a little bit. Okay, here's our current income tax. It's actually changed a little bit since this. But notice, as our incomes rise, our tax rate rises as well. What's this do? Well, when there's a recession, people's incomes fall. When people's incomes fall, they're taxed at a lower rate, which puts more money in their pockets, which has a slight expansionary impact. It helps stabilize our economy from becoming complete catastrophe. Doesn't fix it, but it helps stabilize it. Okay, let's try this out. Last one. Assume that non-discretionary fiscal policy kicks in to stabilize the economy. Most of the time when we are saying this, we're talking about transfer payments. So like welfare, checks that are being sent out, unemployment benefits, money coming from the government to people, not because of any work they did, just to help. And normally these are laws ahead of time. So this is saying, hey, let's assume this non-discretionary fixes our recession on its own, which is unlikely. But Let's just assume it does. So what kind of a gap do we have? So we have a gap of $400 billion. And that $400 billion gap, indicated right here, is a recessionary one because we are producing less than where we want to be. So we have a $400 billion gap. Now, what's key, what you need to know here is our transfer payment multiplier is the same as our tax multiplier. Because remember, this money is going to people. It's not being injected into the economy through government spending. So in order to close this gap, it's going to be change in transfer payments or change in non-discretionary fiscal policy times my transfer payment multiplier, or I'm just going to put TM because it's the same as my tax multiplier. And that's going to equal my change in GDP. So my desired change in GDP here is $400 billion. 400. What's my tax multiplier going to be? Well, it says my MPC is 0.8, which means MPS is 0.2, which means my spending multiplier is 5. So my tax multiplier is 4, or my transfer payment multiplier is 4. It's the same as my tax multiplier. Write that down, circle it, underline it. Non-discretionary fiscal policy has the same multiplier as a tax multiplier. And so those transfer payments are going to have to be $100 billion in order to close a $400 billion gap. In other words, the government sent out $100 billion of money to people just because. And that $100 billion in unemployment benefits and welfare checks and stimulus checks, all of that has a total impact of $400 billion. Again, non-discretionary means it's laws ahead of time. It's not action taken in the moment, laws ahead of time that help a little bit. And so there we go. It's $100 billion for transfer payments. The multiplier for transfer payments is only 4 instead of 5. It's 1 less than the spending multiplier for reasons we already discussed. That's it. That's non-discretionary. Really, the big takeaway is know that it's laws ahead of time that are in place. Most of the time, we're talking progressive tax system and transfer payments like welfare and unemployment benefits that are paid out. And then finally, tax multiplier and transfer multiplier are the same thing. And that's it. All right. Hopefully, all of that caused the aggregate demand shift right back to full employment. Of course, if we're doing this fiscal policy or non-discretionary fiscal policy, that's what will happen. Okay, 3.9, automatic stabilizers. Then you're done with Unit 3, the biggest and most important unit of them all. I'll talk to you soon. Until then.